The Wonderful Sausage is a scary story about a butcher in New Orleans who murders people, grinds them up and sells them as meat. Many years ago, in New Orleans, there was a German man named Hans Muller who owned a sausage factory. The couple were very hard-working, but Muller was growing tired of his wife. She had become old and wrinkled before her time, and he no longer found her attractive. He started having an affair with a younger woman. One dark night, Hans Muller had an argument with his wife. He lost his temper and killed her, stuffing her body into the big meat grinder in the factory. Then he ground her up into sausage meat until nothing of her was left. To keep his evil deed a secret, he told everyone that his wife had left town. Muller mixed his new sausage meat with ground pork and then seasoned it with salt and pepper. He added some sage and thyme and a bit of garlic and, to give it a special flavor, he smoked it in his smokehouse for a while. He called his recipe Muller's Wonderful Sausage and sold it as a delicacy. There was such a demand for this wonderful sausage that Muller was sold out before he knew it. He started keeping an eye out for people who he could turn into tasty sausage meat. One day a nice, plump woman came into his shop. Muller knocked her out and ground her up. Another time, a fat little boy came by. Muller picked him up, shoved him into the grinder and turned him into minced meat. One by one, all of the children in the town began to go missing, and so did their kittens and puppies. Nobody had any idea of what was really going on. Things went on like that for years, but Muller started getting lazy. Customers began complaining about finding bits of bone and cloth in their sausages. One woman even bit into her sausage and found a gold wedding ring. His girlfriend heard the gossip and broke up with him, telling him she didn't want to see him anymore. One night, Muller was working in the factory when he heard a mysterious thump. 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 Coming from his boiling vat. Then, as he watched in horror and disbelief, the bloody ghost of his wife emerged from the grinder. Her head was crushed to a pulp, her brains were dripping down her face and her eyeballs were hanging out. Muller started shrieking in terror and fled from the place. The neighbors heard his screams and wanted to know what was going on. When they went into the factory, they found a stack of dead bodies piled up in the storage room, just waiting to be ground up into meat. When people saw this, they realized what had become of all the missing children and puppies and kittens. The neighbors called the police, and when they arrived, they found Hans Muller cowering in his factory, screaming and crying and waving a big butcher knife around. He was raving like a maniac and kept saying his wife was coming out of the sausage grinder to get him. Muller spent the rest of his life in an insane asylum and eventually committed suicide. The ghost of his wife was never seen again, and neither was his wonderful sausage meat. Many years ago, there was an old one-story house that stood at the top of a hill. The locals called it Groglin Grange, and 3 young people lived there. A girl and her 2 brothers. One hot summer's night, they were all sitting out on the veranda, enjoying the cool air. They watched the sun set, and as the moon was rising over the trees, they decided to go to bed. A few hours later, the girl was lying in bed, unable to sleep with the heat. She was gazing out the window, watching the moon move across the sky, when something suddenly caught her eye. She saw 2 small lights moving through the woods near the graveyard at the bottom of the hill. They looked like the eyes of some strange animal, but she couldn't make out what kind of animal it was. She kept her eyes on the woods, and then something stepped out of the shadows, something ghastly. It was coming up the hill towards the house. For a few minutes, she lost sight of it. Then she saw it coming across the lawn towards her window. It looked something like a man, and yet it didn't. As she watched it, the most uncontrollable horror seized her. She wanted to run from her room, but the door was right next to her window, and she was afraid the creature would see her. She wanted to scream, but her tongue felt like it was glued to the roof of her mouth. She rushed to the door, but before she could open the lock, she heard a scratch, scratch, scratch at the window. When she turned around, she saw a hideous shrunken brown face with flaming eyes glaring in at her. She tried to scream, but she was so frightened that she couldn't make a sound. The creature broke a pane of glass in the window. Then, it reached in with long bony fingers, unlocked the window, and crawled inside. The girl tried to escape, but the creature caught her by the hair. It dragged her over to the bed, then pulled back her head and sank its teeth into her throat. She let out a blood-curdling scream and fainted. When her brothers heard her scream, they rushed to her room, but they couldn't get in because the door was locked. By the time they managed to break down the door, the creature was gone. Their sister was lying unconscious on the bed, bleeding from the wound in her neck. While one of the brothers grabbed a towel and tried to stop the bleeding, the other took off after the creature and chased it down the hill. The thing fled through the moonlight, taking enormous strides, and soon he lost sight of it near the graveyard. The brother went back to the house to see if he could help his sister. The girl was scared and badly hurt, so they took her to hospital where her wound was disinfected. The doctor put a bandage around her neck and she had to stay in hospital for a few days. Gradually, the wound began to heal and the doctor said she was well enough to go home. The brothers reported the incident to the police, but they couldn't figure out what had happened. They said it was probably a lunatic who escaped from the local asylum. The brothers didn't want the girl to come back to the house and stay in the same room, but she insisted. After all, she said, lunatics don't escape from the asylum every day. But just in case, the brothers slept in the room across the hall and kept loaded pistols on their bedside tables. The winter passed peacefully and happily, but one night, a couple of months later, the girl was awakened by a scratching sound at the window. When she opened her eyes, she saw the same hideous, brown, shrunken face staring in at her. This time, she screamed as loud as she could. She screamed with all her might and her brothers grabbed their pistols and came running. The creature took off, but the brothers chased it down the hill. One of them took aim and fired a shot at it, hitting it in the leg. The creature fell over, but it got up and managed to limp over to the graveyard wall. The brothers watched as it scrambled over the wall and seemed to disappear into an old burial vault. The next day, the girl and her brothers went down to the church and demanded that the priest open up the burial vault. Inside, there was a horrifying scene. The coffins had been broken open and bones and rotting flesh were scattered all over the floor. Only one of the coffins had been left intact. When they opened it, there lay the same hideous, withered and shriveled creature that had attacked the girl. When the priest examined the corpse, he found a bullet in its leg. They did the only thing they knew of to rid themselves of a vampire. The priest built a roaring blaze outside the vault. Then, the brothers dragged out the shrunken body and tossed it on the flames. They watched the corpse burn until there was nothing left of it but ashes. Delete the Photos is a scary story about 4 girls who find a camera in a haunted school bathroom. There were 4 teenage girls who lived in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Their names were Ing, Spicy, Nana and Sis. The girls had been best friends for years, ever since they started school together, and they shared an interest in ghost stories and horror movies. They had heard an urban legend about their school. According to the story, a girl went missing one of the school bathrooms and it had been locked up ever since. The girls decided that they would break into the bathroom when nobody was looking and take a look around. I wonder what we'll find, said Spicy. Maybe we'll find the girl's corpse, laughed Nana. That evening, when classes had finished for the day, the girls gathered outside the bathroom. The hallways were deserted and all of the other students had gone home. Sis used a hairpin to pick the lock and the door swung open. The bathroom looked clean, but it was empty. When they checked one of the stalls, they found a camera lying on the floor. The strange thing about it was that it was still working and the battery was full. Sis picked it up and started flicking through the pictures. There was nobody in the photos. They were all empty shots of parts of the bathroom. It looks like they were snapping photos in the dark, said Sis. I wonder what they were up to. Oh my God, I think I know, exclaimed Nana. They were trying to capture a ghost. You're supposed to go into a dark room and snap photos, and if it's haunted, a ghost will appear in one of the pictures. Ing was a little freaked out by this and she wanted to leave. Let's take a selfie before we go, Nana suggested. Spicy and Nana posed together while Sis snapped a picture of them. Then, they left, switching off the lights and closing the door behind them. As Sis was on her way home, her phone started ringing. The call was coming from a private number. When she answered it, she heard a strange, rasping voice on the other end. "Delete," it said. "Delete," then, the call suddenly ended. Sis wasn't sure quite what to make of it. She assumed it was just someone calling the wrong number. When she got home, she plugged the camera into her laptop and started looking through the pictures again. When she came to the photo she had taken of the other 3 girls in the bathroom, she noticed something odd. Nana's hair looked strange. Sis decided to give her a call, but Nana didn't pick up her phone. A few minutes later, when she looked at the picture again, something was wrong. Nana had completely disappeared from the photo. Sis was a little frightened and she wondered if her eyes were playing tricks on her. When she took a closer look, she noticed that Spicy's hair looked much longer, as if she was wearing a wig. Sis was worried and she decided to give Spicy a call. "Hey," said Spicy. "What's up?" "Hi, something really weird just happened," said Sis. "Remember when we took that photo in the bathroom?" "Yes," Spicy replied. "Nana was in the photo, wasn't she?" "Yes," Spicy replied. "Well, she's not in the photo now." "What do you mean?" Spicy asked. "It's just you and in the photo now," said Sis. "And your hair looks really long." All of a sudden, the call cut off. Sis tried to call her back, but Spicy didn't answer her phone. When she looked at the photo again, Sis got a fright. She almost jumped out of her skin. Spicy had disappeared from the photo and now, there was only Ing, standing on her own in the bathroom. Worst of all, there was someone standing behind her. It looked like a woman with long dark hair and pale white skin. Just then, her phone started ringing. When she answered it, Sis heard a familiar voice on the other end. It was very muffled, but it sounded like Ing. "Delete the photos," said Ing. "Delete the photos, Ing, what's wrong?" Sis demanded. "Delete the photos," she repeated over and over. "Delete the photos, Ing." "Where are you?" Sis demanded. "Answer me." Suddenly, the call cut off and Sis heard someone knocking on the door of her apartment. A chill ran down her spine. The knocking was loud and insistent. "Who is it?" cried Sis. There was no answer. Cautiously, Sis made her way down the hallway. The knocking grew louder and louder. Trembling with fear, Sis stood at the front door and put her eye up to the peephole. She was horrified to see another eye staring back at her. She let out a scream and ran back to her bedroom. Grabbing the camera, she quickly deleted all the photos on it. All of a sudden, the knocking stopped and there was an eerie silence. She was so frightened, she started crying. She just sat there on her bed, holding herself and rocking back and forth. Then, with trembling hands, she picked up the camera, pointed it at herself and took a selfie. The next morning, when her roommate came home, Sis was nowhere to be seen. All 4 girls were reported missing. The police searched for them high and low, but no trace of them was ever found. I Would Rather Die is a creepy story about a boy and a girl who fall in love and then fall out of love. In Beijing, China, there were 2 high school students, a boy and a girl, who really liked each other. They both worked hard at their studies because they wanted to succeed in life. They would always help each other with their homework and they spent so much time together that they eventually started having feelings for each other. Soon, they became boyfriend and girlfriend. When they graduated, the boy went to Nanjing University and the girl went to Beijing University. They kept in touch and maintained their relationship. They planned to get married when they finished college and have children together. But too much time spent apart can change a person's feelings, and in Beijing, girls are vulnerable to temptation. While the girl was living in Beijing, she met a lot of men. They were more successful, wealthier, wittier, and more handsome than her boyfriend. She decided to break up with her boyfriend and stay in Beijing. When she broke the news to her boyfriend that she was dumping him, he went out of his mind. He kept pestering the girl with phone calls until she stopped answering. Then, he traveled all the way to Beijing to see her, but the girl was very unsympathetic. She told him their relationship was over and she had found a new love. She told him to accept the breakup and go home. In a moment of anger and desperation, the boy took a knife and cut his wrist. "I would rather die than lose you," he cried. He had some kind of crazy idea that this would prove to the girl how much he loved her and convince her to take him back. He was very much mistaken. The girl didn't even try to stop him. She didn't even bother to call an ambulance for him. She just stood there and watched as the blood drained from his body. He writhed on the ground in convulsions of pain and agony. Until his dying breath, he stared at the girl, hoping she would agree to take him back. When he was dead, she called the police and they came to take his body away. She didn't even bother to attend his funeral. Shortly afterwards, the girl discovered she was pregnant. 9 months later, she gave birth to a little boy. Before long, she was fed up with being a mother. Taking care of a child was just too much work and it was affecting her social life. When men found out she had a child, they didn't want to date her. Eventually, she decided to give the little boy to her mother so that she could raise him instead. She didn't like her baby much, so it wasn't a difficult decision to make and she found her life was much more fun without him. However, her mother insisted that she visit the boy 1 weekend per month. One night, the girl drove to her mother's house to visit her son. She only planned to stay there an hour or so and then she would head back to Beijing to spend the evening with her new boyfriend. When she got to her mother's house, she saw the boy sitting in the front garden. She noticed there was something odd about him. When she looked closer, she suddenly realized that he was slicing his wrist with a knife and sucking the blood. The girl freaked out. She ran over and told him to stop. The little boy stared at her intently. That look was familiar. She recognized that stare. Suddenly, the child pounced on her and slit her throat with a knife. "I would rather see you die than lose you," he cried. The Sickle is a terrifying and gruesome story about a murder that happens in a locked room. A married couple lived in a small house in Japan with their son and daughter. The son was very angry with his sister and wanted to play a really nasty prank on her. He decided that he would secretly videotape her on the toilet and then post the video online. He wanted to humiliate his sister in front of her friends. The boy hid a video camera under a towel in the bathroom. Minutes later, his sister went to the bathroom and locked the door behind her. She never came out again. Her mother started to wonder what was taking her daughter so long. She banged on the bathroom door and called out the girl's name, but got no reply. Worried, she told her husband and eventually, they managed to force the door open. What they found inside the bathroom filled them with horror. Their daughter was lying in a pool of blood on the tiled floor. She had been stabbed to death. Her face was so sliced up that she was unrecognizable and her tongue had been cut off. There was a bloody sickle lying on the floor beside her. The police were called immediately and they came to investigate the scene. Inspecting the bathroom, they found that it posed a mystery. The door had been locked from the inside, the window was securely latched and the bathroom was so small that nobody could have been hiding inside, lying in wait for the girl. So how was she murdered? The police saw that the only possible entrance was a small vent in the wall that measured only 10 inches by 10 inches. Nobody could have fit through such a small space. The police were absolutely stumped. They could not figure out how anyone would have gotten inside to kill the girl. The police carefully dusted the sickle for fingerprints, but unfortunately, they found none. At this point, they felt that the case would never be solved. They questioned the mother and father, but when it came time to question the son, he was nowhere to be found. They searched the house and eventually found him curled up in a wardrobe. His eyes were wild and he was sobbing uncontrollably. His hands were shaking violently. They noticed that he was holding a video camera. Unable to question him, the police decided to review the videotape. What they saw in the footage would terrify them for years to come. They pressed play on the video camera and the screen showed the young girl sitting on the toilet. When she finished and stood up, the police noticed some movement in the small vent behind the toilet. A tiny figure emerged noiselessly from the vent. It was carrying a sickle. The policemen could hardly believe what they were seeing. The figure measured only 6 inches in height. It jumped onto the girl's back, and before she had a chance to scream, it sliced open her throat with the sickle. Then it began stabbing the girl until she was dead. But the horror was not over. The tiny figure sliced up the girl's face and cut out her tongue. Afterwards, the figure approached the video camera. The figure's face was that of a gnarled and wrinkled old woman. It looked directly into the lens and hissed, "You're next." Then, the tiny figure disappeared back through the small vent, carrying the girl's severed tongue. After watching the videotape, the police officers wiped tears from their eyes. Some vomited on the floor, and one even lost control of his faculties and pooped his pants out of sheer terror. Today, the case remains unsolved and the tiny woman has never been identified. The videotape still exists, but the police refuse to release it to the public. It sits in an evidence locker at the police station. The police call this case the Sickle Mystery and refuse to discuss it with the media.